Welcome back, gamers of the internet. Show of hands, how many of you play tabletop RPGs? Pen and paper, physical dice, that sort of thing. Now, those of you who have, what's the best part of TTRPGs? Is it the combat? Is it the character building? Is it roleplay? All of these things do make for a great tabletop experience. But for me, the best part of games like D&D is that I can be creative and do whatever the hell my mind comes up with. The limits of human imagination go far beyond anything that can be programmed and put into a virtual space. Some games come close. The immersive sim genre is designed specifically to let the player be creative and solve problems in any way they can think of. And just last year, talking about D&D games, the biggest one ever, Baldur's Gate 3, came out to critical acclaim. So far, I'm 93 hours into it, and I think I'm still in Act 1. Despite the size of games like Baldur's Gate or Prey or any other myriad of quote-unquote immersive games, I think the video game that feels the most like playing tabletop D&D is a little game from 2004 called Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines. And ironically, its comparative smallness is what makes it feel so massive. Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines, or VTMB, is based on the World of Darkness, a TTRPG like D&D. I've not had the chance to play this tabletop system, but I would certainly like to try. If anyone has played a World of Darkness game, how is it? Is it a lot of fun? I mean, if it's anything like the video game, I know I'd love it. VTMB is one of my favorite video games of all time. As alluded to earlier, part of that is because of how immersive this game is. It feels like I'm playing a tabletop game of D&D. I will talk at length about that aspect later, but first we should scratch the surface with some basics this game offers. There's nothing more basic than character creation. What you choose to play as will shape the rest of your playthrough. First up, you choose your vampire clan. They each specialize in different aspects of the game. Some are good at melee, some are charismatic, and some are more psychotic than your junior high school girlfriend. Every vampire also gets access to table-turning blood magic. I didn't realize until starting a new game for footage, but I think every clan gets their own suite of blood magic to play with. In my first playthrough, I played as a Tremere. Their magic is focused around dealing damage with projectiles and AoEs. They are the wizards of the vampire world. In my character creation footage here, I picked a Ventru. They have mind control type magic, useful not just in combat, but also in social situations. After picking your clan, you get to allocate points into your attributes, abilities, and disciplines. This analogy isn't going to be perfect because these two game systems are quite different, but you can think of attributes as D&D ability scores, abilities as D&D skills, and disciplines as weird freak shit. Spells, I guess. The combat in this game is awesome. You have three main pillars to play with: melee, ranged, and blood magic. Bonking people with melee weapons is super satisfying.
Where you go?
The sound effects are great, the animations are great, the ragdolling is great. It's genuinely so much fun. Firearms start out pretty weak, but if you dedicate time into them, they build up a lot in power as the game progresses. And come on, shotguns will never not be fun to use in video games. And of course, it goes without saying, but blood magic fucking rocks. Instead of using mana, you use a resource called blood points. Casting spells consumes blood points, and when they're gone, the only way to get them back is to drink the blood of living creatures. As if I needed incentive to suck someone up. Of course, sometimes it's better to avoid combat outright through stealth. Hiding your identity as a bloodsucker is preferable to being shot at. And naturally, if someone sees you trying to drink blood, you're gonna have a bad time. So staying in the shadows is going to be necessary for your survival on occasion. Combat is only one half of this game. Maybe even less than half, to be honest. Most of this game is spent talking to NPCs and exploring the world. As fun as the combat is, Exploring and talking is even better. This game employs my favorite mechanic any quest-based game can have. That mechanic is using your own brain to figure out what to do. I brought this up in my Oblivion video, but one of my minor pet peeves in RPGs is the over-reliance of the lobotomy marker. I'm always more interested when the game can just give you well-written directions and instructions about what you need to be doing. I love figuring things out for myself. In VTMB, the quest log will usually give you a place you need to go as well as what you should be trying to accomplish while there. You might think that trying to navigate without a compass or a quest marker would make things overly complicated and difficult, but VTMB avoids that possibility with some clever as fuck game design. Firstly, the world you explore is small, and that's a good thing, a great thing even. As the player, you'll explore a couple of different areas of LA. Each section is composed of a few streets and about a dozen or so named locations of interest. Maybe some unnamed ones thrown in there too. Now that doesn't sound like too many locations, but it's still way more than my brain could remember, especially if I take breaks between play sessions. What if I forget where everything is? Well, that's where the second bit of clever game design comes in. In each area, there's a handful of bus stops scattered about. And what can you find at each of these bus stops? Why, a convenient map of the area, complete with names and your current location. I love this so much. I prefer this to having a map available at all times. You see, if you could access the map with just the push of a button at any time, you wouldn't really ever have a reason to learn the layout of the world. But because getting to see a map is this minor inconvenience, it encourages you as the player to memorize the city. At the very least, you need to remember where the bus stops are. From there, it only gets easier and easier to remember everything else. That's probably enough yapping about bus stops and street maps. Let's talk about talking. Conversations with other vampires are incredibly important in Vampire the Masquerade. After all, if there's no quest markers, you need to rely on what others tell you in order to complete their quests. Of course, NPCs also have a lot to say about the world in general. You can spend a ton of time probing them for information about vampire lore. Mostly, you learn about the different political groups in the area, and their various struggles dealing with each other. But the information these characters give you isn't just backdrop. This struggle is kind of the main plot. It's relevant throughout the entire game. It's especially relevant as you get close to the end game. Dialogue isn't the only thing that wraps back around as you march towards the credits. Seemingly minor tasks you do for others turn out to be very important and plot relevant. For example, early on, this thin-blooded vampire asks you to look into some mysterious Chinese vampire. When you eventually find him, you also find a journal he wrote talking about how weak the power structure is here in LA. He says it would be easy to take over. At the time, this just seems like flavor text, and explanation for why this specific vampire is a problem. But by the end of the game, you learn that a Chinese faction of vampires is actively vying for power in LA, and you need to stop them. It becomes the main quest. Hours pass between these two events. It's so cool when things wrap back around like this. VTMB pulls this trick with basically all of its quests, dialogue, and even the characters. NPCs that seem like they won't be important later on usually end up mattering a lot. It makes the story feel very intentional and devoid of fluff. I don't know about you, but it's way easier for me to be immersed in a story if everything happening in that story is actually relevant. Two more mechanics I need to bring up. The first is lockpicking, which is pretty basic. It's just a simple check against your skill. But the other mechanic, the computer mechanic, is way more interesting. When you interact with a computer, you're presented with menu options. It's usually a home menu, an email menu, and some other things depending on the computer. To access these menus, you need to physically type out the name of that menu on your keyboard. It's a small thing, but it's so immersive. It's just one more layer that's been removed between me and my character. I'm typing exactly what my character is typing. Some computers are naturally locked down, and you need a password to access them. Again, hacking is just a check against your skill level, but if you're smart, you can figure out the passwords on your own. Sometimes passwords are just written down in the environment, so if you're observant enough, you can just find the passwords. But if the password hasn't been lazily written down by some absent-minded security officer, you still have a chance to deduce it. You see, the passwords are almost always related in some way to the location the computer is in, and they are always simple words. Even if you fail a hacking attempt, just trying will show you how many characters the password is. In this private office, for instance, I want to access the info page. The password to get in is business, which is, related to a business type person dealing with their contacts. I can see that connection. I mean, it's unlikely you just happen to guess business as the password, but it could happen. Okay, so I've explained the mechanics and functions of the game, but how does it all come together to make the most immersive video game ever? The game that feels like playing tabletop D&D, except it's in the virtual space. Well, to explain that, let's go into detail with a specific quest, for example. How about the quest I brought up earlier with the Chinese vampire? The quest starts when I initiate dialogue with this guy in the most lit club in Santa Monica. He tells me he's being stalked by an Asian vampire, and gives me a driver's license that vampire dropped. The license doesn't belong to our mysterious stalker, but it must belong to someone. All we have to go on is a name. What can I do with a name alone? Well, I walked to the nearest bus station to look at the locations of Santa Monica to give me some inspiration. And oh, of course! The first location listed is a bail bond business. I remember from a previous quest, this location contains a public record of people who've had run-ins with the law. Maybe the owner of this license is in that database? When I get there, I use the immersive computer mechanic to look for a Mr. Virgil Crumb, the name on the license. And how fortuitous! He's in the system! He's also dead. Somehow, I'm gonna need to get into the morgue. I could try lockpicking, but I'm not very good at it. I could try brute force, but I'm not so sure I want to have a run-in with the human law enforcement. Maybe it's as easy as asking nicely? That worked! Awesome! I've located the owner of the license. His other belongings include a keycard for some place called Foxy Boxes. With this new information, I take a look at the bus stop map and find the location in question. Inside is a journal left by the Asian vampire, as well as the vampire himself. A fight is inevitable, but little does he know, I was a professional baseball player in life. With this vampiric stalker slain, I return to the quest giver and complete the quest. This quest is super short. It took me about 15 minutes, but it showcases how all of the different mechanics come together to make for such an immersive experience. I had to put the pieces together myself. I had to make the jump from driver's license name to bail bond. I had to figure out how to get into the morgue. And I was able to do all this without struggling. It just made sense. This is what I mean when I say this game feels like playing tabletop D&D. Every action I wanted to take, I was able to. It's seamless. Obviously, I can't actually do anything I set my mind to in this game. In reality, this game is pretty limited. I can't break down walls, I can't try to scale a building, I can't even use 50 feet of rope to pull off some crazy shenanigans. But this game is designed so perfectly that I never even think to try doing those kinds of things first. The quote-unquote correct solution to the quest is also the most obvious. Best of all, the game never tells me directly what these obvious solutions are. So I always feel like I'm the one who outsmarted the game. I'm the one who figured out what to do without any help. My final talking point is about the perspective this game has. I'm sure it's rather obvious by this point in the video, but VTMB is played in either first or third person. For me, these perspectives help a lot with immersion. The real-time combat also helps in that regard. Together, the perspective and combat type keep me super engaged into what's happening right in front of me. It really puts me in the scene, if you know what I mean. So that's why I think Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is the closest any video game has ever come to feeling like tabletop D&D. It's unbelievably immersive and impeccably well designed to cover up any shortcomings it might have. That being said, I haven't played every game ever made. So, do you think there's a game out there that has VTMB beat in this department? Have you played any video games that felt like a TTRPG experience? Let me know if you have. I would quite like to play them. And while you're down there, consider leaving a like and a subscribe. I'm not really sure what's next for me. There's a few directions I could take. There's several projects I have in mind. One of them is a follow-up to that Shiki video I came out. This video would go more in depth talking about the gray morality that's present in the series. But I don't know if it's necessary to dive back into that well. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, everyone.